Elena Carter chose Millridge because small towns ask few questions. Perfect for a woman with scars she couldn't hide and secrets she couldn't tell. The diner job was meant to be forgettable, just like her. Instead, she became the favorite target of local veterans who mocked her damaged face and arms, their cruelty sharpened by boredom. "What's the matter, Scarface? Cat got your tongue?" They laughed, never noticing how she assessed exits or held kitchen knives with military precision. Only Sergeant Dean Wallace watched with growing suspicion, especially when her sleeve rode up revealing a tattoo no civilian should have. The mark of Ghost Company, an elite unit officially declared dead after a classified mission gone wrong. As recognition dawned in his eyes, Elena knew her carefully constructed disappearance was unraveling. The past she'd buried in desert sand had followed her to this small southern town, and the people who had laughed at her scars had no idea they were poking at a predator, not prey. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun hadn't fully risen when Elena Carter stepped off the Greyhound bus. A quiet breeze drifted through the small southern town of Millridge, rustling the American flags that adorned almost every storefront. Elena adjusted the sleeve of her jacket, tugging it down over her right arm as she picked up her single duffel bag. She'd chosen this town for a reason. Small enough to disappear in, but large enough that newcomers weren't an oddity. The military base 30 miles south meant veterans were common, and people didn't ask too many questions. At least that's what she'd hoped. The Help Wanted sign in the window of Old Glory Diner had been there for 3 weeks. Raymond Blackwell, the owner, had interviewed 7 people and hired none. His standards were high: punctuality, respect, hard work, values he'd carried from his years as a Marine. When Elena walked in, her posture straight as a flagpole, eyes forward, he noticed something immediately. "Military?" he asked, looking up from her application. Elena hesitated. "Yes, sir." "What branch?" Another pause. "Army." Raymond nodded slowly, studying her face. There was something in her eyes, a distance, a guardedness he recognized. He'd seen it in the mirror for years after he came home. "You start tomorrow. 6 a.m. sharp." The Old Glory wasn't fancy. Red vinyl booths, cream-colored walls adorned with military memorabilia, and a jukebox that played mostly country and classic rock. The regulars were a mix of townspeople and veterans, the latter group claiming the corner booth every morning like it was territory to be defended. Elena's first day started with whispers. The long-sleeved uniform couldn't hide everything, especially the jagged scar that ran from her left jawline down her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. When she reached for coffee mugs, a faded tattoo peeked out from beneath her sleeve. Just a glimpse of black ink, impossible to make out fully. "I'm Joanne," said an older waitress with bottle blonde hair and heavy makeup. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Raymond says you're taking the morning shift with me." "Elena," she replied simply, tying her apron with practiced efficiency. "That's some scar you got there," Joanne said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Kitchen accident?" Elena simply shook her head and moved past her to the coffee station. "Not much of a talker, are you?" Joanne called after her. "That's fine. Customers prefer it when you smile anyway. Think you can manage that with that face?" From the kitchen, a young man with spiky hair and tattoo sleeves popped his head through the order window. "Joanne, leave the new girl alone. Not everyone wants to hear your life story on day one." He grinned at Elena. "I'm Tommy. I burn the toast and overcook the eggs. Welcome to paradise." By mid-morning, the Veterans Corner was filled. 4 men in their 50s, trading stories over coffee that had been refilled so many times, it was practically transparent. And at the center, Sergeant Dean Wallace, tall, broad-shouldered, with a gray-flecked beard and eyes that seemed to catalog every person who entered. "New girl's got an interesting look," said Kyle, the youngest of the group. Barely 30, he'd served 1 tour and never let anyone forget it. "What do you think happened to her face?" Dean glanced at Elena as she efficiently worked the counter. "None of our business." "Maybe she got it in a fight," Kyle continued, ignoring Dean's dismissal. "Looks like someone tried to teach her a lesson. Or maybe she taught someone else one." Dean muttered. When Elena approached their table, Kyle leaned back, grinning up at her. Coffee, sweetheart. And tell me, those burns or knife marks? Seems like you've seen some trouble. Elena poured his coffee without responding, her face a neutral mask. Not talking, huh? What's the matter? Someone finally teach you to keep quiet? Kyle, Dean warned, his voice dropping an octave. Elena simply finished pouring and moved to the next customer. Only Dean noticed her hand, steady as a surgeon's despite Kyle's taunting. That night after closing, Raymond found Elena wiping down the booths alone. Joanne had left early, claiming a headache. The radio played softly in the background, and Raymond paused in the doorway when he heard Elena's voice. It was low, rhythmic, a cadence he hadn't heard in years. Up in the morning with the rising sun, gonna run all day till the running's done. She fell silent when she noticed him. Raymond pretended not to hear, giving her a brief nod before retreating to his office. But the familiar military cadence played in his mind long after. In the employee locker room, Joanne stood frozen, Elena's locker door slightly ajar. She'd come back for her forgotten purse, but curiosity had gotten the better of her. Between her fingers, she held a worn army patch, the emblem partially burned away, and a folded paper that looked official. Discharge papers? She couldn't read it all before hearing Raymond's footsteps approaching. The next morning, Elena served coffee to the veterans' table, moving with the same quiet efficiency. Kyle watched her with narrowed eyes. Scars like that mean baggage, he said loudly as she turned to leave. Wonder what kind of trouble follows you around, new girl. Elena paused. Then slowly, she turned back to him. For the first time, a faint smile crossed her lips. She reached for the coffee pot with her right arm, the sleeve riding up just enough to reveal part of her tattoo. Black ink in a distinctive pattern that made Dean Wallace freeze mid-sip. She poured Kyle's coffee without a word, then walked away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. That night, Elena sat alone in her rented room above the hardware store. She opened a small leather notebook and wrote a single line. Day 217. They haven't found me yet. Her fingers traced the scar on her neck as memories flashed. Desert sand, the smell of burning fuel, a soldier screaming as she dragged him from a smoking Humvee. She closed her eyes, willing the images away, but they persisted as they always did. Outside her window, the small town of Millridge settled into evening routines. Porch lights coming on, dogs being walked, dinner tables being set. Normal lives, safe lives. Elena Carter watched and wondered if she'd ever know that peace again. In the privacy of her room, she finally rolled up her sleeve fully, revealing the tattoo in its entirety. A military unit emblem, but not one most soldiers would recognize. And beneath it, in small letters, Ghost Company, we die so others live. She closed the notebook and turned out the light, knowing tomorrow would bring more questions, more stares, more whispers. But she'd endured worse, much worse. The morning rush at Old Glory Diner had developed a rhythm Elena could anticipate. The construction workers at 5:30 a.m., town employees at 6:15, and the veterans precisely at 7:01. Dean Wallace always entered, first, as if securing the area before the others arrived. 3 weeks had passed since Elena started, and the whispers had mostly faded into background noise. Tommy had become friendly, asking no questions but offering small kindnesses. A fresh muffin set aside, taking difficult customers from her section. Joanne remained cool but professional, her suspicion evident in sideways glances. Elena was refilling Dean's coffee when it happened. She reached across to grab a fallen spoon, her sleeve riding up just enough. Dean's mug froze midway to his lips. Where'd you get that ink? His voice was low, controlled, but his eyes had widened slightly. Elena pulled her arm back, tugging her sleeve down. Excuse me? That tattoo. Where'd you get it? Dean's tone left no room for deflection. The other veterans at the table looked up, suddenly interested. Kyle leaned forward. I got a lot of tattoos, Elena said flatly. Most have stories I don't share. Turned and walked away, feeling Dean's eyes boring into her back. Something had shifted. She could sense it as clearly as an approaching storm. That night, Dean sat alone in his small house, a shoebox of old photographs spread across his kitchen table. His hands trembled slightly as he sorted through them. Desert landscapes, grinning soldiers, memorial services. His memory wasn't what it used to be, not since the IED that had scrambled his brain for 3 weeks in a German hospital. But he knew that tattoo. He'd seen it before. Looking for ghosts again, his ex-wife had called it, this obsessive cataloging of his past. Maybe she was right. But the ghosts never seemed to stay buried anyway. The next morning, Joanne cornered Tommy by the supply closet. "You know there's something off about that woman," she whispered. "I found military papers in her locker, discharge stuff." "You went through her locker?" Tommy looked disgusted. "Jesus, Joanne, that's low even for you. I'm telling you, she's not who she says she is. I've got a cousin who works at the VA. She says there's no record of an Elena Carter serving in the last 15 years. So what? Maybe she used a different name. Maybe she likes her privacy. Leave her alone." But Joanne wasn't finished. By lunchtime, she'd mentioned her discovery to 3 regular customers, and Kyle, who took the information with a gleeful interest that made Tommy uneasy. "Stolen valor," Kyle announced loudly when Elena approached his table that afternoon. "You know what that is, sweetheart? When someone pretends to be military, wears the uniform or the ink they didn't earn." Elena set down his burger without comment. "Makes me sick," Kyle continued. "People who pretend they served just to get respect or handouts." Dean, sitting across from him, set down his fork with a sharp click. "Enough, Kyle." "What? You sweet on her now?" Kyle laughed. "Come on, Dean. You saw that tattoo. No way she earned that." Dean's stare silenced him. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was something colder. Kyle looked away first. Raymond had noticed the tension. From behind the counter, he watched the exchange, then followed Elena into the kitchen. "Everything okay out there?" he asked. "Fine," Elena replied, arranging slices of pie on plates. Raymond hesitated. "Listen, I don't pry into my employees' business, but if there's something I should know—" "There isn't." Elena's tone closed the door on the conversation. Later that afternoon, a customer Elena hadn't served before took a seat at the counter. Heavy-set, red-faced, already half-drunk at 3 in the afternoon. He watched her work for several minutes before calling out, "Hey, Scarface, I need some service here." The diner fell quiet. Elena approached him calmly. "What can I get you?" "What happened to you anyway? Your boyfriend get rough? Or maybe you're into that sort of thing." He grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Before Elena could respond, a chair scraped loudly. Dean Wallace stood, walked over, and placed himself directly behind the man. "You ever mock a Purple Heart vet again in front of me, you'll eat through a straw." The silence in the diner became absolute. The drunk man turned, taking in Dean's size and the dead seriousness in his eyes. He mumbled something unintelligible, threw a few dollars on the counter, and hurried out. Dean returned to his seat without looking at Elena, but the message had been sent. The remaining customers returned to their meals, conversation slowly resuming. After closing, Raymond found Elena counting her tips at the counter. "Dean doesn't speak up like that often," he said. Leaning against the register, Elena continued counting. "I didn't ask him to." "I know." Raymond paused. "I've seen tattoos like yours before." Elena's hands stilled. "Not exactly like it," he continued, "but close enough. Special operations, right? The kind they don't put in the regular announcements." Elena looked up at him finally. "I didn't come here to explain myself. I came to forget." Raymond nodded slowly. "Fair enough, but sometimes forgetting isn't an option. Not in a town this size." When she returned to her room that night, Elena noticed something different. The window she always left cracked exactly 1 inch was fully closed. Someone had been there. She did a quick sweep, nothing obviously missing, but her notebook had been moved slightly from where she'd left it. In the bathroom, she stripped off her uniform and examined her scars in the mirror. The jagged line down her neck, the burns across her right shoulder and back, the small circular marks that peppered her left side, 15 years of service written in scar tissue. She rolled up her sleeve to check the tattoo, the emblem that had caught Dean's attention. A stylized falcon with a lightning bolt surrounding a code that meant nothing to most people, GC 703. Ghost Company, 7th Squad, 3rd Platoon, a unit that officially had never existed. They weren't supposed to know, she whispered to her reflection. 2 days later, Dean was waiting for Elena when she arrived for her shift. He sat in his usual booth, but hours earlier than normal, a manila folder on the table before him. "I need 5 minutes," he said, as she tied her apron. Elena glanced at the empty diner, then at the clock. Raymond wouldn't arrive for another 30 minutes. She slid into the booth across from Dean. "I was Gulf War," Dean said without preamble. "Before that, special operations training at Fort Bragg. Never deployed with any special units, though." Elena said nothing. "But I had friends who did. One in particular, Mike Lawson. You know that name?" A flicker of something crossed Elena's face. Dean opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. 8 soldiers in desert camo, faces streaked with dust and sweat, arms around each other's shoulders. In the center, a younger Elena, hair regulation short, face unscarred, eyes alive with something that had since dimmed. "I found this in Mike's things after he died," Dean said quietly. "No names written on it. No unit designation. But that tattoo?" He pointed to the visible mark on one soldier's arm. "That's the same one you have. And the thing is, I've asked around. Nobody's heard of any unit with that emblem." Elena stared at the photograph for a long moment. Her finger traced the edge but didn't touch the image itself. "What do you want, Sergeant Wallace?" "The truth," he replied simply. "Who are you really? And why are you hiding in a diner in the middle of nowhere?" Elena slid the photograph back to him. "Some missions don't leave paperwork," she said softly. "But they leave scars. That's all you need to know." She stood to leave, but Dean wasn't finished. "There are people in this town who respect what veterans have done, and there are people like Kyle who just like having something to hold over others. If you're hiding something that puts a target on your back, I deserve to know." "Why?" Elena asked. "Because you appointed yourself my protector?" "Because whatever you're running from might not stay buried," Dean replied. "And I don't want civilians caught in the crossfire." The words hung between them, an acknowledgement of a danger neither was willing to fully name. Raymond arrived early that morning to find Elena and Dean sitting in silence, the photograph between them. He recognized the tension immediately, the kind that came before decisions that couldn't be unmade. As he moved toward them, Elena stood abruptly. "My shift starts now," she said, walking past Raymond without meeting his eyes. Dean gathered the photograph back into his folder. When Raymond raised an eyebrow in question, Dean shook his head slightly. Some conversations weren't meant to be shared. The morning progressed normally, but beneath the routine, currents were shifting. Joanne watched Elena with renewed suspicion. Tommy noticed Dean watching Elena with something like concern. And Kyle, always looking for weakness, sensed opportunity. In the employee locker room, Elena found her locker open again, nothing missing, but the message clear. Her privacy was an illusion here. She changed quickly, then removed her notebook from its hiding place behind the loose baseboard. The photo she kept inside was singed around the edges, the same group from Dean's photograph, but with one face scratched out violently. On the back, a date, March 17th, 2009. The day everything changed. That evening, as Elena walked home, she noticed a black sedan parked across from her building. Not local plates, windows tinted too dark to see inside. She altered her route, doubling back through an alley before approaching from the rear of the building. In her room, she lifted the loose floorboard beneath her bed and removed a small metal box. Inside, a Beretta M9, 3 clips of ammunition, a satellite phone, and a passport with a different name. She checked each item methodically, then replaced everything except the gun, which she slid beneath her pillow. Sleep came in fragments that night, broken by dreams of desert heat and the sound of gunfire. In one dream, she was dragging a wounded soldier through sand that turned to quicksand, pulling them both down. In another, she stood before a military tribunal, her uniform stripped of insignia, voices accusing her of betrayal. She woke at dawn, the scar on her neck burning as it sometimes did when rain was coming. But the sky outside was clear, promising another scorching southern day. The kind of heat that reminded her too much of places she'd tried to forget. At the diner, a note waited beneath the register. Raymond's handwriting, brief and to the point. Office. Before opening, she found him sorting receipts, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up as she entered, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I've been trying to find you," he said without preamble. "Online, military, records. Nothing comes up under Elena Carter." She remained silent. "But I remembered something last night. A mission in 2007, northern Iraq. My unit was pinned down for 3 days. Extraction seemed impossible until a team showed up. No markings, no clear chain of command. Led by a black woman sergeant who moved like she'd been born in combat. Different name than yours, but the same eyes." Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. The slightest tensing. "I'm not asking for confirmation," Raymond continued. "Just wanted you to know, whatever you're running from, whatever you did or didn't do, you've got a place here, for as long as you need it." For the first time since her arrival, Elena's guard lowered slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. As she turned to leave, Raymond added, "And Elena, the veterans in this town, they notice things civilians don't. Sooner or later they'll figure it out too." "I know," she replied. "That's what I'm afraid of." Raymond Blackwell couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan in his bedroom spun lazily overhead, doing little to dispel the summer heat or the memories that kept him awake. He'd been trying for weeks to place Elena's face, and tonight it had finally clicked. Baghdad, 2007. His platoon had been separated from their convoy during a sandstorm, then ambushed. 3 days pinned down in an abandoned school, supplies dwindling, 2 men critically wounded. When extraction seemed impossible, they appeared, a small unit without standard insignia, moving with precision through enemy territory. And leading them, a young black sergeant, her voice steady as gunfire erupted around them. "Hold position! We're getting you out!" She dragged 2 of his men through 50 yards of open ground under heavy fire. When a building collapsed, cutting off their escape route, she'd found another way, navigating through the burning city like she'd memorized every alley. Raymond had tried to thank her afterward, to get her name for his report. She'd simply shaken her head. "We weren't here, Marine. You extracted yourselves." He'd checked records later, tried to find any mention of the unit. Nothing. As if they'd been ghosts. Now, 13 years later, that same woman was serving coffee in his diner. Different name, her face marked by new scars, but the same steady gaze, the same precise movements. Raymond knew what it meant when soldiers disappeared from records. Nothing good. Morning light was breaking as he finally drifted off, the pieces of the puzzle still not quite fitting together. Across town, Dean Wallace was conducting his own investigation. The photograph had gnawed at him for days. He'd called in favors, contacted old military buddies, searched online archives. Finally, a name emerged, Ghost Company. His contact, a retired intelligence officer named Harris, had sounded nervous on the phone. "Where did you hear that name?" "Just came across it," Dean had lied. "Sounds like some special ops folklore." A long pause. They were real, officially designated Special Reconnaissance Unit 7, but Ghost Company was what they called themselves. Multi-branch special operations, primarily focused on high-risk extractions and intelligence gathering. Why haven't I heard of them? Because in 2009 they were officially disavowed. Mission went bad. Details classified beyond anything I had access to. After that, The unit was wiped from records. The survivors scattered. Survivors? Dean had pressed. How many died? Officially? All of them. The words echoed in Dean's mind as he drove to the diner the next morning. If Elena had been part of Ghost Company, she was officially dead, and someone wanted to keep it that way. At the same time, across town, Joanne Miller opened her front door to find her son waiting. Brian Miller had his mother's eyes and his father's temper. Discharged from the Army 2 years ago, he'd drifted between construction jobs and bar fights ever since. "Morning, Mom," he said, pushing past her into the house. "Got any coffee?" Joanne hurried after him. "Brian, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Atlanta." "Got bored." He rummaged through her refrigerator. "Besides, heard there might be someone interesting in town." Joanne froze. "What do you mean?" Brian turned, leaning against the counter. "Friend called. Said there's a woman working at Dad's old hangout, scarred up, military type. That ring any bells?" The hair on Joanne's neck stood up. "How would your friend know about her?" "Small world, Mom." He pulled out his phone, showing her a social media post, a blurry photo of Elena at the diner. "She's got a reputation in certain circles. Thought I'd come see for myself." Joanne studied her son's face, remembering the day military police had arrived at their door. The dishonorable discharge, Brian's insistence that he'd been set up, that a black female sergeant had falsified reports against him. "What did she do to you?" Joanne asked quietly. Brian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say we have unfinished business." At the diner, the morning rush moved in its usual rhythm. Elena worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. The black sedan had reappeared outside her apartment building. Twice now, she'd spotted men in suits watching the diner from across the street. They were getting closer. A crash from the kitchen broke her concentration. Tommy had dropped a stack of plates, cursing as he knelt to clean up the mess. Elena moved to help him. "Sorry," he muttered. "Butterfingers today." She knelt beside him, gathering ceramic shards. "It happens." Tommy glanced around, then lowered his voice. "My cousin was deployed in 2008. 75th Rangers. Said a unit extracted them after an ambush outside Fallujah. No markings, led by a female. Sergeant." He met her eyes directly. He remembered her because she carried him 2 miles with a shrapnel wound in her own leg. Never got to thank her. Elena's face remained impassive, but her hands stilled momentarily. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he described her tattoo to me once, same as yours." Tommy gathered another handful of broken ceramic. "Don't worry, I won't say anything." Before Elena could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Dean Wallace entered, earlier than usual, his expression grim. Behind him walked Kyle, looking smug. Elena returned to the counter, feeling the weight of their attention. Something had changed. Kyle knew something, or thought he did. "The usual?" she asked as they sat at their regular booth. Dean nodded, not meeting her eyes. Kyle leaned back, arms spread across the booth. "Actually, I'll have whatever our hero recommends," he said, the word hero dripping with sarcasm. "Since she's so experienced." Elena ignored the bait. "Coffee and toast coming up." As she walked away, she caught Raymond watching the exchange. From his office doorway, concern etched in his features. The day progressed with mounting tension. Kyle made increasingly pointed comments about fake soldiers and war stories. Dean remained unusually quiet, as if wrestling with a decision. By afternoon, Elena knew something was coming. The air in the diner felt charged, like the moments before a firefight. After the lunch rush, she stepped outside for air. The alley behind the diner was quiet, shaded from the harsh summer sun. She leaned against the brick wall, eyes closed, calculating options. It was time to move on. This town had been a mistake. Finally alone. The voice startled her. Kyle stood at the alley entrance, blocking her path back to the diner. "Your shift's not over," Elena said evenly. "Neither is yours." He stepped closer. "But I think it's time we had a chat about who you really are." "I'm nobody," Elena replied. Just a waitress. Kyle laughed. That's not what my buddy says. He showed me your picture. Said you were the bitch who got him kicked out of the army. Elena stilled. Your buddy? Brian Miller, Joanne's son. Ring any bells? Kyle's smile turned cruel. Said you falsified reports? Got him discharged for something he didn't do? Memory flashed. A frightened Afghan girl. A soldier with Joanne's eyes dragging her into a storage tent. Elena's intervention. The court-martial that followed. Your friend lied, Elena said quietly. To you. To the military tribunal. To himself. Kyle advanced suddenly, backing her against the wall. You know what happens to liars in this town? His hand shot out, grabbing her scarred wrist. Elena moved, without thinking. Muscle memory from years of combat training. In one fluid motion she twisted free, swept his legs, and pinned him face first against the ground, his arm locked behind him at a painful angle. Try it again, she whispered in his ear, and you'll need a cane. She released him and stepped back. Kyle scrambled to his feet, face flushed with humiliation and rage. You're dead, he spat. You hear me? I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you really are. He stormed off, leaving Elena alone in the alley, the familiar coldness of combat settling over her. It was definitely time to leave. Inside, she found Raymond waiting by the employee lockers. Everything okay? He asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Fine, Elena replied automatically. Raymond sighed. I saw Kyle follow you out, and I know that look. You're planning to leave. Elena said nothing. Before you decide, Raymond continued, there's something you should know. I've been making calls about Ghost Company. Elena's head snapped up. And about a mission in 2009. That went wrong. Very wrong. He met her gaze steadily. I heard you were the only one who came back. The words hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of a shared burden. Raymond knew the weight of being the sole survivor, the questions that never faded. Why me? What could I have done differently? They sent us in blind, Elena said finally, her voice barely audible. The intel was wrong. We were supposed to extract a political prisoner. Turned out he was working with the very people we were fighting against. She paused. My commanding officer realized it too late. He ordered us to complete the mission anyway. I refused. And they buried it, Raymond finished. Made you disappear along with the truth. Elena nodded once. You're more than what they see? Raymond said quietly. And you've got a place here for as long as you want it. He handed her a folded paper. Her schedule. Upgraded to more hours. The pay rate doubled. A peace offering. A reason to stay. That evening after her shift, Elena walked through the diner's dining room, collecting salt shakers for refilling. The place was nearly empty. Just Dean at his usual booth, nursing a coffee gone cold. Sergeant, he acknowledged. As she passed, Elena paused. I'm not a sergeant anymore. Once a soldier, always a soldier. Dean gestured to the seat across from him. Got a minute? She hesitated, then slid into the booth. I made a mistake, Dean said, his voice low. In 2009, I was working security contracts. Private sector, but still connected. I heard chatter about a mission, Ghost Company being sent into a trap. Elena's expression hardened. What are you saying? I knew the commanding officer who authorized that mission, Colonel Barrett. We'd served together years before. Dean's hands trembled slightly. He asked for my assessment of the intel. I saw the red flags, but I kept quiet. Didn't want to contradict a superior officer. The revelation hit Elena like physical pain. You knew? Not everything. Not enough to stop it. But enough that I should have spoken up. Dean met her gaze, the weight of 13 years of guilt evident in his eyes. I've lived with that decision every day since. Elena fought the urge to walk away, or worse, the faces of her fallen teammates flashed through her mind. Friends, family, all gone because of faulty intel that someone could have questioned. Why tell me this now? She managed finally. Because Barrett's looking for you, Dean said, and he's getting close. As if on cue, the bell above the door chimed. A well-dressed man entered, mid-50s, military posture, eyes that missed nothing. Colonel James Barrett had arrived. Elena felt time slow, the way it did in combat. Barrett hadn't changed much, a little grayer at the temples, a few more lines around his eyes, but the same calculating expression. He scanned the diner, his gaze stopping when it reached Elena. A thin smile spread across his face. "Sergeant Carter," he said, using her real name for the first time since she'd arrived in Millridge. "Or is it Bennett now? Or Williams? You've used so many names, it's hard to keep track." Dean stood, positioning himself between them. "James." Barrett's eyebrows rose slightly. "Dean Wallace. Small world. I wasn't aware you two were acquainted." "What do you want?" Elena asked, remaining seated, forcing calm into her voice. "Just a conversation." Barrett approached, uninvited. "About unfinished business." Raymond emerged from the kitchen, alerted by the tension. "We're closed," he announced. Barrett ignored him, focus fixed on Elena. "You have something that belongs to us, Sergeant. Intelligence that was never meant to see the light of day." "I don't have anything," Elena replied evenly. "No?" Barrett smiled again. "Then you won't mind coming with me to confirm that. For national security, of course." Raymond stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere with you." Barrett finally acknowledged him with a dismissive glance. "This is military business, civilian. I suggest you stay out of it." "My diner, my rules," Raymond replied. "And I don't recall inviting you in." The standoff stretched, the air charged with potential violence. Finally, Barrett nodded, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Another time, then." He placed a business card on the table. "When you're ready to talk, Sergeant." He left as suddenly as he'd arrived, the bell chiming cheerfully in his wake. Elena stared at the card, her hand unconsciously touching the scar on her neck. The past had found her, just as she'd always known it would. That night, Elena checked the diner thoroughly before leaving, a habit born from years of watching for threats. Her vigilance was rewarded when she found it, a small electronic device hidden inside a napkin dispenser. A listening bug, military grade. She crushed it beneath her heel, then texted Dean. "They're looking for me again." Walking home, the weight of a knife concealed in her sleeve offered little comfort. The black SUV following at a distance was no longer being subtle. Barrett was done waiting. The next morning dawned with an unnatural quiet. Elena arrived at the diner early, checking every corner for additional surveillance. Finding none, she began prep work in the kitchen, the familiar routine a temporary distraction from the approaching storm. Tommy arrived next, unusually subdued. "There's a guy in a suit outside," he reported. "Been there since I walked up." Elena nodded, unsurprised. "More will come." "What's going on?" Tommy asked. "For real?" Before she could answer, or more likely deflect, the front door opened. Colonel Barrett entered, followed by two men in civilian clothes with military bearing. Raymond emerged from the office, positioned himself behind the counter, one hand beneath where Elena knew he kept an old service pistol. "Elena Carter," Barrett announced formally, "I need you to come with us." The diner was empty, save for them. Too early for customers. Elena dried her hands slowly on a dish towel. "On what authority?" Barrett produced an official-looking document. "Military intelligence. You're AWOL with classified information that poses a threat to national security." Elena approached, examined the paper without touching it. "This says I'm accused of stealing classified intelligence. That's not what happened, and you know it." "What I know," Barrett replied coldly, "is that you disobeyed direct orders, compromised a high-priority mission, and disappeared with sensitive information. That makes you a traitor." "That mission was dirty," Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I buried the truth for their protection." She gestured toward his men. "But if they want a war, I've still got my uniform." Barrett's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." There are bigger things at stake than your conscience. The door chimed again. Dean Wallace entered, taking in the scene with a veteran's practiced assessment. "What's going on here, Barrett?" he demanded. Barrett turned, irritation flickering across his features. "This doesn't concern you, Wallace. Military business." "In a civilian establishment," Dean countered. "Let me see that warrant." As the men argued, Joanne slipped in through the back entrance. She froze momentarily at the tension-filled scene, then moved purposefully to her locker. When she emerged, she held a wrinkled paper, Elena's discharge form. "Colonel," she interrupted, approaching Barrett, "if she's trouble, I want her gone from here." She handed him the paper. "Found this in her things weeks ago." Barrett smiled as he examined the document. "Thank you, ma'am. Very helpful." The betrayal stung Elena less than it might have. She'd expected it from Joanne, whose loyalty to her son outweighed any workplace courtesy. Barrett pocketed the discharge paper and nodded to his men. "Sergeant Carter, you're coming with us. Now." "She's not going anywhere." Dean stepped between them. Barrett sighed with theatrical patience. "Wallace, you're interfering with a national security matter. Step aside or face charges yourself." "What national security?" Dean demanded. "The mission was 13 years ago. You were there too, weren't you, Sergeant?" Barrett's voice dropped. "You saw the intel. You knew what we were really doing." Dean's face paled slightly. "I saw enough to know it was wrong." The standoff might have continued, but the diner's front door burst open. Kyle and 3 friends entered, purposeful and angry. "There she is," Kyle announced. "The fraud." The situation deteriorated rapidly. Barrett's men moved to detain Elena. Dean interceded physically. Kyle and his friends, misreading the situation as their chance for revenge, joined the fray. In the chaos, Barrett produced handcuffs, snapping one around Elena's wrist before she could react. Then everything changed. Dean's fist connected with Barrett's jaw, a clean, practiced strike. Barrett stumbled back, shocked. His men reached for concealed weapons. Kyle and his friends, suddenly realizing they'd walked into something far beyond their understanding, retreated toward the door. Elena seized the moment. With one fluid motion, she twisted the handcuff, using Barrett's momentary disorientation to flip him onto a table. Glass shattered. Coffee spilled. The diner erupted into pandemonium. "Go!" Dean shouted to Elena. "I'll hold them." Raymond appeared from behind the counter, his old service pistol now visible. "Back door. My truck keys are on the hook." Elena hesitated only briefly before moving. Years of training took over. Assess, decide, act. She grabbed Raymond's keys and bolted through the kitchen, past a wide-eyed Tommy. Behind her, she heard Dean confronting Barrett. "You want to detain someone? Start with me. I've got 13 years of testimony about your operation waiting for a hearing." Outside, Raymond's truck started on the first try. Elena pulled away, just as Barrett's men emerged from the diner, in the rearview mirror. She saw Dean being roughly restrained, still shouting as they forced him into a black SUV. He had sacrificed himself to give her time, a debt she couldn't repay with flight. The town of Millridge blurred past as Elena drove, her mind racing through options. Running would only delay the inevitable. Barrett would find her again, and next time, he'd be less inclined toward conversation. She needed leverage, the kind that could stop men like Barrett permanently. 20 minutes outside town, Elena pulled onto a logging road that wound up into the forested hills. Raymond had mentioned an old ranger cabin he maintained, a weekend getaway, rarely used. If his directions were accurate, it would provide temporary shelter. The cabin was small but solid, hidden among pine trees on a ridge overlooking the valley. Elena secured the perimeter by habit, checking sight lines and possible approaches. Inside, she found basic supplies, canned food, bottled water, a first aid kit. Enough to last a few days. From the cabin's porch, she could see Millridge in the distance, small, vulnerable, full of people who had nothing to do with her war, but would be caught in the crossfire if Barrett decided to escalate. Night fell. Elena sat in darkness, weighing options. Barrett wanted something specific, not just her silence, but information he believed she possessed. The truth about that final mission was more dangerous than she'd realized. A memory surfaced. Major Reva Hale, her commanding officer, passing her a small drive moments before the ambush. "If anything happens to me, make sure this gets out." Elena had never viewed the drive's contents. After escaping the ambush, she'd hidden it, unwilling to risk exposing information that had already cost lives. Now, it might be the only thing keeping her alive. As midnight approached, Elena made her decision. From her pocket, she removed a small emergency flare, standard military issue, compact and powerful. She stepped onto the porch and fired it into the night sky. The red light arced high above the trees, burning bright against the darkness. 3 minutes. Nothing happened. Then, faintly at first, came the sound of movement in the forest below, someone approaching with the careful precision of military training. Elena readied herself, hand on the knife at her belt. Friend or foe, she would be prepared. A voice called from the darkness, female, authoritative, achingly familiar. "Ghost, too. Is that really you?" Elena's breath caught. A figure emerged from the tree line, a black woman in her 50s, lean and weathered, moving with the fluid grace of a lifetime soldier despite the cane in her right hand. Major Reva Hale, presumed dead for 13 years. "They buried us in silence," Reva said, approaching the cabin. "But we weren't done talking." Elena descended the porch steps slowly, disbelief warring with a sudden fierce hope. "They told me everyone died," she said. "The entire unit." Reva's smile was grim. "They never found all of us." The two women stood facing each other in the moonlight, survivors of a war most people never knew existed, carrying truths that powerful men had tried to bury. Ghosts returned to haunt those who had condemned them to death. Behind them, the lights of Milridge twinkled in the valley. Somewhere in that town, Barrett was planning his next move. Dean was possibly in custody. Raymond and Tommy were caught. In the middle of a conflict not of their making, the past had arrived, demanding its due. And this time, Elena wouldn't face it alone. The night air carried a chill despite the summer season, as if the mountains themselves recognized the gravity of the reunion taking place. Elena and Reva stood facing each other, 13 years of separation hanging between them like a physical presence. "I looked for you," Elena said finally. "For months after. There was nothing. No records, no graves, no answers." Reva leaned on her cane, her expression softening slightly. "That was the point. After you escaped, Barrett declared the entire operation classified. Ghost Company never existed. Those who died had their records altered. Training accidents, peacetime casualties. And you? Officially died of injuries sustained in a helicopter crash." Reva's smile was bitter. "Unofficially, I was given a choice. Permanent silence or permanent disappearance." Elena processed this, remembering the chaos of that final day, the ambush, the firefight, the desperate evacuation. She'd been separated from her unit, forced to find her own way out. By the time she'd reached safety, Ghost Company had been erased from existence. "You could have contacted me," she said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. "And risk them finding you too?" Reva shook her head. "I made the call to protect whoever survived. Staying hidden was safest. Until now." "They already found me," Elena said. "They'll find you too." Reva's expression hardened. "Then we better make sure we're ready when they do." Inside the cabin, they spoke in hushed tones, comparing fragments of intelligence gathered over years in hiding. Reva had been watching Barrett, from the shadows, collecting evidence of an operation that went far beyond a single botched mission. "It was never about extracting a political prisoner," Reva explained, spreading hand-drawn maps across the cabin's small table. "That was the cover. The real mission was to secure weapons being sold to insurgents." "By who?" Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. "By us." Reva's voice was flat. "Or rather by a private contractor with ties to Barrett's command. They were running weapons through official channels, making millions. Our mission would have exposed the operation." The pieces clicked into place, Why a routine extraction had turned into an ambush. Why an entire special operations unit had been disavowed. Why Barrett was still hunting survivors 13 years later. They sacrificed Ghost Company to protect a weapons deal, Elena said, the full weight of the betrayal settling over her anew. And they're still operating, Riva added. Different names, different regions, same game. Barrett's been promoted. Twice since then. He's protected. Elena thought of Dean, possibly in custody now because of her. Of Raymond Tommy, the diner. Collateral damage in a war they never signed up for. Not anymore, she said firmly. It ends here. Riva studied her former lieutenant, noting the determination that even years of hiding couldn't diminish. You always were the conscience of Ghost Company, she said softly. Even when it cost you. Dawn was breaking when they finished strategizing. Elena stepped onto the porch, watching the town of Millridge come alive in the distance. Somewhere down there, Barrett was hunting her. But now, for the first time in years, she was hunting him back. Back in town, the aftermath of the diner confrontation had rippled through the community. Dean Wallace sat in the county sheriff's office, refusing to answer questions without a lawyer present. The sheriff, a former Navy man named Harwood, was clearly uncomfortable with the military personnel demanding Dean's cooperation. This is my jurisdiction, he reminded Barrett. You want to detain one of my citizens? You go through proper channels. Barrett's smile never reached his eyes. This is a matter of national security, Sheriff. Proper channels have been established. Not in my county, they haven't, Sheriff Harwood replied. Not until I see federal warrants signed by a judge I recognize. The standoff might have continued, but Kyle Anderson pushed his way into the office, his earlier bravado replaced by visible agitation. What the hell is going on? He demanded. You said that woman was a fraud, stealing valor. You didn't say anything about military police and classified operations. Barrett regarded Kyle with thinly veiled contempt. This doesn't concern you, civilian. Like hell it doesn't, Kyle shot back. You used me to get to her, made me think I was doing some patriotic duty, exposing a fake. She is a fake, Barrett said smoothly. Everything she's told you is a lie. She abandoned her unit, left soldiers to die. Dean looked up sharply. That's not what happened, and you know it. Barrett turned to him. Careful, Wallace. You weren't there. I was. I saw the reports, Dean countered. The real ones, before you had them altered. The tension in the room shifted. Sheriff Harwood's attention focused on Barrett with new suspicion. Altered reports? He echoed. That's a serious accusation. Barrett straightened his jacket. This conversation is over. Wallace comes with us. National Security Directive. He handed the sheriff a document bearing official seals. Your cooperation is appreciated, but not required. Outside the sheriff's office, Kyle stood alone, wrestling with conflicting narratives. The woman he'd mocked and harassed for weeks. Was she a hero or a traitor? Barrett's words didn't align with what he'd witnessed in the diner, the way Dean and Raymond had defended her. Impulsively, he headed toward the woods where he'd seen Elena escape. Whatever the truth was, he needed to hear it from her. Meanwhile, at the Old Glory Diner, Raymond had closed for the day. The mess from the confrontation remained, shattered mugs, overturned chairs, a testament to violence erupting in a place meant for community. Tommy helped with cleanup, uncharacteristically. Serious. What happens now? Raymond picked up a broken plate, adding it to a growing pile. Depends on Elena, and on what Barrett does next. She's in real trouble, isn't she? Tommy asked. Like, not just military trouble, but the kind people disappear over. Raymond considered his response carefully. In my experience, when powerful men go to these lengths to bury something, it's because the truth would cost them everything. The bell above the door chimed. Joanne entered, her usual confidence notably absent. She surveyed the damage before meeting Raymond's gaze. Is she really a fugitive? She asked quietly. No, Raymond replied. She's a soldier who refused an illegal order. One that would have cost innocent lives. Joanne hesitated. Brian told me she falsified reports against him, got him discharged for something he didn't do. And you believed him without question, Raymond observed, no judgment in his tone. Because he's your son. Yes. Joanne's voice wavered. But I got a call this morning from a woman who served with him. She told me what really happened. What Brian did to that Afghan girl. Tears welled in her eyes. Elena stopped him, reported him. As she should have. Raymond nodded slowly. People show their true character in moments of choice. Helena made hers, now we make ours. Outside the diner, the small town of Milridge was dividing into factions. Some residents viewed Elena as a dangerous outsider bringing trouble. Others, particularly veterans who had witnessed Dean's defense of her, saw a soldier being persecuted by her own government. Barrett, meanwhile, had set up an operations center in the town's small business hotel. Maps covered the walls, communications equipment hummed, and armed men in civilian clothes moved with military precision. Wallace isn't talking, one reported, and the sheriff's being uncooperative. Barrett barely looked up from his laptop. Wallace is irrelevant. Focus on finding Carter. She has the drive. What drive, sir? Barrett fixed the man with a cold stare. That's need to know. And you don't. The man nodded, chastened. Yes, sir. We've got teams searching the forest where she was last seen. Thermal imaging from our drone shows 2 heat signatures at a cabin 5 miles up. Barrett smiled thinly. Well done. Prepare for extraction. Full tactical gear. Authorized use of force. In the forest, Kyle had been hiking for hours, lost and increasingly worried. The woods were thicker than he'd anticipated, the trails less clear. As afternoon faded toward evening, he realized he was thoroughly lost. A sound caught his attention. Movement in the underbrush ahead. He froze, suddenly aware of how vulnerable he was. Elena emerged from between the trees, weapon drawn. Upon seeing Kyle, her expression shifted from alertness to irritation. "What are you doing out here?" she demanded. Kyle raised his hands instinctively. "Looking for you. I need to know the truth." "About what?" "About everything. About you, about Barrett, about what's really going on." Kyle's usual arrogance had vanished. "Barrett said you abandoned your unit. Dean says you saved lives by disobeying orders. I don't know what to believe anymore." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing options. "Come with me," she said finally. "But one wrong move, and I'll leave you tied to a tree for the bears." Or, the cabin. Riva was preparing defenses, improvised alarms around the perimeter, escape routes marked, weapons positioned strategically. "Who's this?" she asked sharply as Elena returned with Kyle. "Kyle Anderson, local veteran, came looking for answers." Elena pushed him toward a chair. "Sit." Kyle obeyed, intimidated by Riva's commanding presence. "You're with her unit?" "I was her commanding officer," Riva replied. "Major Riva Hale, Ghost Company." Recognition dawned on Kyle's face. "Wait, Ghost Company, the unit from that classified operation in Syria?" At their surprised expressions, he added, "I had a buddy in intelligence. He mentioned it once, said it was the biggest cover-up he'd ever seen." Riva and Elena exchanged glances. "What exactly did your friend say?" Riva asked carefully. "Not much, just that a special ops team got wiped out because someone high up needed them gone." Kyle looked between them. He said there were no survivors. "That's what they wanted everyone to believe," Elena said. "Makes it easier to hunt us if the world thinks we're already dead." A beeping sound interrupted them. One of Riva's perimeter alarms. She moved to the window, scanning the tree line with practiced precision. Movement. Multiple targets approaching from the south ridge. Elena joined, her spotting the tactical team making its way through the forest. "Barrett found us." "Then we go with Plan B," Riva said, retrieving a backpack from beneath a floorboard. "Split up, predetermined rendezvous." Elena nodded, gathering essentials rapidly. Kyle watched in confusion. "What's happening? What should I do?" Riva regarded him coldly. "You brought them to us." "No, I swear I didn't." "Your phone," Elena interrupted. "Did you bring your phone?" Kyle pulled it from his pocket. "Yeah, but..." Riva snatched it, examining the device. They're tracking him. Military-grade spyware. She crushed the phone under her boot. They've been following him since he left town. Elena's mind raced through options. We need a diversion. The tactical plan formed quickly. Kyle, despite his initial protests, agreed to help. His role was simple: create a distraction to the east while Elena and Riva escaped west. A risky strategy, but the only one with a chance of success. "Why are you helping us?" Elena asked as Kyle prepared to leave. He hesitated. "Because Dean stood up for you, and because Barrett used me. I don't like being used." The raid began at dawn. Barrett's team approached from multiple angles, employing standard military tactics against what they assumed were two isolated targets. They weren't prepared for the countermeasures: smoke bombs, improvised from cabin supplies, obscured sightlines. Tripwires triggered falling branches and brush piles. The forest itself became a weapon in the hands of soldiers trained to use any environment to their advantage. Kyle played his part perfectly, creating enough noise to draw half the team eastward. In the confusion, Elena and Riva slipped away to the west, moving swiftly despite Riva's limp. 2 miles from the cabin, they separated. Riva heading toward a predetermined safe house, Elena circling back toward town. They had agreed the time for hiding was over. Barrett needed to be exposed, and for that, they needed allies. Elena moved through the forest with practiced stealth, avoiding patrols and staying off main trails. She was nearly at the forest's edge when gunfire erupted. In the distance, sharp cracks followed by shouting. She froze, listening intently. The gunfire wasn't from the direction Kyle had gone, but from Riva's escape route. Against all tactical sense, Elena turned back, moving rapidly toward the sound. The terrain was rough, slowing her progress. By the time she reached the clearing, where the confrontation had occurred, it was over. Blood marked the dirt. Shell casings glinted in the morning sun, and Riva lay against a fallen log, her hand pressed to her abdomen, crimson spreading between her fingers. "Told you not to come back," Riva said through gritted teeth as Elena knelt beside her. "Shut up and let me see." Elena examined the wound. Clean through and through, serious but not immediately fatal if treated. She began applying pressure using supplies from her pack. "Barrett's men?" she asked. Riva nodded. 2-man scout team. They're down, but more will come. Elena worked quickly, bandaging the wound as best she could. "Can you move?" "Not fast enough." Riva grabbed Elena's wrist with surprising strength. "Leave me. Complete the mission." "Not happening." "That's an order, Lieutenant." Elena met her gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Major, I don't take orders from ghosts." With effort, she helped Riva to her feet, supporting her weight. They moved slowly, every step clearly painful for the older woman. After 100 yards, Riva stumbled, nearly falling. "Stop," she gasped. "This isn't working." She reached into her jacket, removing a small metal case. Inside was a USB drive, weathered but intact. "The original mission files," Riva explained. "Everything, the weapons deals, the money trail, the names. I've been adding to it for years." She pressed it into Elena's hand. "Don't let me die for nothing. Finish this." Elena closed her fingers around the drive. 13 years of truth contained in a device smaller than her thumb. "We finish it together." Always the optimist. Riva's smile was strained. "Now go. That's the last order I'll ever give you." Elena hesitated, torn between loyalty and duty. Then, from the distance came voices. Barrett's men closing in. "I'll come back for you," she promised, helping Riva into a hidden position beneath thick underbrush. "You better," Riva replied. "I've got 13 years of complaints about your insubordination saved up." Elena moved away with a final glance back, the drive secure in her pocket. Whatever happened next, the truth would not stay buried. The morning. Sun cast long shadows across Millridge's main street as Elena made her way back into town. She had abandoned stealth for speed, knowing Barrett's focus would be on the forest rather than the town itself. Her first priority was finding Dean. If Barrett had him in custody, official or otherwise, time was limited. She needed allies, information, and a plan. The sheriff's office seemed the logical starting point, but approaching it directly was too risky. Instead, Elena circled behind the adjacent buildings, using service alleys to avoid the main roads. As she passed behind the diner, a figure emerged from the back door. Tommy froze when he saw her, then quickly waved her inside. "Everyone's looking for you," he said, closing the door behind them. "Barrett's got men all over town." "Where's Dean?" Elena asked. "Sheriff's office at first, but they moved him. Some kind of temporary detention at the hotel where Barrett's set up." Tommy lowered his voice. "Raymond's trying to get to him through legal channels, but they're stonewalling." Elena nodded, processing the information. "I need your help." "Whatever you need," Tommy replied without hesitation. "My cousin told me what your unit did in Fallujah. I owe you." "I need a distraction. Something to draw Barrett's men to one side of town while I approach from the other." Tommy grinned. "I can do one better. Give me 20 minutes. While Tommy set his plan in motion, Elena used the diner's landline to make a call, a number she'd memorized years ago but never used. 3 rings, then a gruff voice answered. "Sullivan." "It's Bennett," Elena said, using her real surname for the first time in years. "I need the favor you owe me." The voice on the other end was silent for a moment. "Thought you were dead." "Not yet, but I need help staying that way." Another pause. "What do you need?" "Pressure. High level. On Colonel James Barrett, current assignment. Milridge County. That's a big ask. He's running weapons through military channels, has been for years, I have proof." The silence stretched longer this time. "Upload the proof to a secure server. I'll make calls." Elena glanced at the drive in her hand. "I need time to access the data. Can you slow him down until then?" 12 hours. That's all I can guarantee." "It's enough. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." The line went dead. Outside, the sound of sirens filled the air. Tommy's distraction was underway, a reported gas leak at the town hall, requiring evacuation of the area around the hotel where Barrett had established his base. Elena slipped out the back door, moving confidently toward the now less guarded hotel. The drive felt heavy in her pocket. 13 years of secrets, lives lost, and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. She was halfway across the back parking lot when a vehicle screeched to a halt beside her. The passenger door flew open, revealing Kyle behind the wheel. "Get in," he urged. "Barrett's men spotted Tommy. They know it's a diversion." Elena hesitated only briefly before sliding into the car. Kyle accelerated away, taking back roads out of town. "Why are you helping me?" Elena asked. Kyle kept his eyes on the road. "I got separated from Barrett's men during the raid. Overheard them talking about eliminating all witnesses, including me." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Figured that meant I picked the wrong side." "Where are we going?" "East Road, toward the highway. Then wherever you need." Elena considered her options. The drive contained the evidence, but she needed equipment to access and upload it, and time Barrett wouldn't give her. "The county library," she decided. "It's outside Barrett's search zone and has computer access." Kyle nodded, turning onto a rural road that would circle around to the library without passing through town center. "Dean stood up for you," he said, after a few minutes of silence. "Got himself arrested protecting someone he barely knows. That means something." "It does," Elena agreed. "Barrett said you abandoned your unit, left them to die." Kyle glanced at her. "But that's not what happened, is it?" "No." Elena looked out the window at the passing countryside. "We were sent to extract a prisoner, supposedly a political dissident with valuable intelligence. When we arrived, we discovered he was actually a war criminal, helping supply weapons to insurgents, the same weapons that were killing American soldiers." "And you refused to extract him," Kyle guessed. Elena nodded. "My commanding officer ordered us to complete the mission anyway. I refused. In the argument that followed, we were ambushed. Most of my unit died covering our retreat." Kyle absorbed this in silence, finally understanding the weight she carried. So what's on the drive? Evidence that Barrett and others were selling weapons through back channels. Our mission would have exposed the operation, so they set us up to fail. When some of us survived anyway, they erased all record of our existence. The library was quiet when they arrived, only a handful of patrons browsing the stacks. Elena moved quickly to a computer in the back corner, inserting the drive with practiced care. The files were encrypted, but Riva had included the decryption key in a separate text file. Elena worked methodically, copying the most damning evidence. To prepare for upload, someone's coming, Kyle warned, positioned as lookout near the entrance. Elena glanced up to see a black SUV pulling into the parking lot. Two men in suits emerged, scanning the area with the alertness of trained operatives. Barrett's men, she confirmed. How did they find us? Library cameras, Kyle realized. They're scanning feeds from public buildings. Elena worked faster, uploading files to the secure server Sullivan had provided. The progress bar moved with agonizing slowness. 56%, 63%, 71%. They're coming in, Kyle reported, moving away from the window. What's the plan? Elena eyed the fire exit to their right. Keep uploading. I'll lead them away. Before Kyle could protest, she was moving, deliberately visible as she passed the front desk. Barrett's men spotted her immediately, changing direction. To pursue. Elena led them through the non-fiction section, down a service corridor, and out a side door. The chase continued across the library grounds and into a residential neighborhood beyond. She was faster, more agile, but they had numbers and vehicles. Eventually, they cornered her in a construction site at the edge of town, half-built homes and stacks of materials offering temporary cover, but no real escape. Barrett himself arrived minutes later, stepping from a black SUV with the confidence of a man who believed he'd won. "It's over, Sergeant," he called, his voice echoing among the unfinished structures. "There's nowhere left to run." Elena emerged from behind a stack of lumber, hands visible. "You're right. I'm done running." Barrett smiled thinly. "Where is the drive?" "Safe, and its contents already uploaded." The smile vanished. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "In about an hour, your superiors will receive detailed evidence of your weapons operation. The names, the dates, the money trail. Everything." Barrett's composure slipped, just slightly. "Who would believe you over me? You're a disgraced soldier, officially dead for 13 years. They'll believe the evidence. And they'll believe Major Hale, whose testimony is included in those files." "Hale is dead," Barrett snapped. "Like me?" Elena's smile was cold. "Ghosts can be surprisingly talkative when they want to be." Barrett signaled to his men, who moved, to flank Elena. "Search her. Find the drive." "It's not on me," Elena said calmly, "and your time is running out." As Barrett's men closed in, a new sound cut through the air. Police sirens approaching rapidly. Moments later, Sheriff Harwood's cruiser pulled up, followed by two deputy vehicles. "This is a military operation, Sheriff," Barrett called clearly, irritated by the interruption. Harwood stepped out, hand resting casually on his sidearm. "Actually, it's not. Just got word from the Pentagon. Your operation has been officially suspended pending investigation." Barrett's face darkened. "That's impossible. Tell that to General Sullivan, who signed the order." Harwood produced an official document. "All personnel under your command are to stand down immediately." Elena fought to keep her expression neutral. Sullivan had come through, faster than expected. Barrett's world was collapsing around him. His men hesitated, looking to him for direction but clearly unwilling to defy a direct Pentagon order. "This isn't over," he said to Elena, his voice low and dangerous. "You're right," she agreed. "It's just beginning." As Barrett was escorted to the sheriff's cruiser, Elena noticed movement behind the gathered vehicles. Dean Wallace approached, accompanied by Raymond and Tommy. "You okay?" Dean asked, examining her for injuries. "I am now," she replied. "How? Did you get released?" "Pentagon order," Raymond explained. Same one that suspended Barrett's operation. Whatever you did, it worked, Tommy grinned. The whole town's talking. Half of them think you're a hero. The other half think you're a spy. Either way, it's good for business. Elena managed a tired smile. Speaking of business, I think I missed my shift. Consider it a paid vacation, Raymond said dryly. Though you might want to find a new career. Waitressing seems to attract trouble for you. As they walked toward Raymond's truck, Elena felt the weight of 13 years beginning to lift. Barrett was in custody. The truth was coming to light. For the first time since Ghost Company fell, justice seemed possible. But one task remained. Unfinished. I need to go back to the forest, she told Dean. Riva's still out there, wounded. Dean nodded immediately. I'll drive. Raymond, can you handle things here? Go, Raymond urged. Bring her home. The forest was quiet as Elena led Dean to where she'd left Riva. The underbrush showed signs of movement. Riva had dragged herself deeper into cover, leaving a faint trail only Elena could recognize. They found her semi-conscious, her bandages soaked through but still alive. Her eyes focused on Elena with effort. Took you long enough, she murmured. Traffic was hell, Elena replied, the familiar banter a relief after hours of tension. Barrett's in custody. The files are uploaded. It's over. It's never over, Riva said weakly. But it's a start. As Dean helped Elena carry Riva back to the vehicle, the setting sun painted the forest in gold and shadow. In town, lights were coming on, life continuing despite the day's drama. Elena looked back once at the wilderness that had sheltered them. For 13 years she had lived as a ghost, haunting the edges of a world that had declared her dead. Now, step by painful step, she was walking back into the light. And she wasn't walking alone. 3 weeks after Barrett's arrest, the bell above the Old Glory Diner's door chimed. Conversation stilled as Elena Carter walked in, dressed not in her waitress uniform but in jeans and a simple black t-shirt. Her scars were visible, as was the tattoo on her arm, no longer hidden beneath long sleeves. Silence hung for a moment before Tommy broke it with a whoop from the kitchen. Look who's back from the dead! The tension dissolved. Several patrons stood, offering nods of respect or quiet words of welcome. Elena moved through the diner with the same quiet dignity she'd always shown, but there was something different. Now, a weight lifted, a shadow dispelled. Joanne stood behind the counter, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. When Elena approached, she straightened, meeting her gaze directly. If you still want the job, Joanne said, holding out a fresh apron. Raymond says your position is open. Elena accepted the apron, the simple gesture bridging a gulf between them. Thank you. Joanne nodded once, eyes bright with unshed tears, then busied herself with the coffee machine. No further words were needed. The apron said everything. Raymond emerged from his office, his usually stern expression softening at the sight of Elena back in his diner. Wasn't sure you'd come back, he said quietly. Neither was I, Elena admitted. But I've been running for 13 years. Gets exhausting after a while. Raymond led her to a quiet booth in the corner, away from curious ears. How's Riva? Stable. Doctors say she'll walk again, but the recovery will be slow. Elena sipped the coffee Joanne had silently placed before her. She's at the VA hospital in Atlanta. Better security there. And Barrett? Military custody. The evidence was too substantial to ignore even for people who wanted to. Elena's expression hardened briefly. But men like Barrett have friends in high places. The investigation will be thorough but controlled. Raymond nodded, understanding the political realities at play. And you? What happens to Elena Carter now? She considered the question, one she'd been asking herself since the truth had emerged. That depends on what you have in mind for this place. Raymond raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I saw how many veterans come through here. How many are struggling like I was, like Dean was? Elena leaned forward. This could be more than just a diner, Raymond. It could be a shelter, a place for veterans to find their footing again. Raymond was silent for a long moment, considering. I've thought about it before. Never had the right person to help run it, though. Now you do, Elena said simply. The idea took shape over the following days. Raymond owned the building next to the diner, a former hardware store vacant for years. With some renovation, it could provide temporary housing for veterans. In transition, the diner would offer employment opportunities, and Elena's military connections could help navigate the labyrinth of VA benefits and services. Word spread quickly through the town. Some residents donated furniture, tools, or time. Others kept their distance, still uncertain about the woman who had brought military conflict to their quiet community. One afternoon, as Elena was measuring spaces in the future shelter, a hesitant knock came at the door. Kyle Anderson stood outside, hands shoved in his pockets, expression somewhere between embarrassment and determination. "Heard you might need help with construction," he said when Elena opened the door. She studied him for a moment. "We could use an extra pair of hands." Kyle nodded, stepping inside. "I wanted to say," he began, then stopped, struggling with the words. "What I said to you when you first came here, about your scars, it was wrong." "Yes, it was," Elena agreed, offering neither absolution nor condemnation. "I wrote this," Kyle continued, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "It's not much, just an apology. A real one." Elena accepted the letter without reading it. "What changed your mind about me?" Kyle considered the question. "When Barrett's men were willing to kill me just for being in the way, and when you risked everything to expose the truth." He shrugged. "Made me think about what courage actually looks like." Elena nodded, recognizing the genuine change in the man who had once mocked her. "There's a stack of drywall that needs hanging in the back room. Think you can handle that?" "Yes, ma'am," Kyle replied, the address no longer sarcastic but respectful. As Kyle went to work, Elena returned to the diner where Dean Wallace sat nursing a cup of coffee. Since his release, he'd been a regular presence, helping with the shelter, preparations and offering quiet counsel drawn from his own years of struggle after service. "Kyle signing up for the renovation crew?" he asked as Elena slid into the booth across from him. "Seems like it." She studied Dean's face, noting the new ease in his expression. "How are you sleeping?" Dean shrugged. "Better some nights. The nightmares don't go away, but they're quieter, I guess." "That's something." "It is." Dean hesitated, then added, "I've been offered a position, VA Outreach Coordinator for Veterans with PTSD. Elena raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a good fit." "Maybe." Dean traced the rim of his coffee cup. "They want me to work out of a regional office, though. Would mean leaving Millridge." "But you're not going to take it," Elena guessed. Dean shook his head. "This shelter of yours, it's more hands-on, more real. Those bureaucratic positions, they're just not for me." Before Elena could respond, the door burst open. Tommy rushed in, his face flushed with excitement and relief. "They dropped the charges," he announced, waving a document. "All that BS about aiding a fugitive, gone." After Barrett's arrest, Tommy had been briefly detained for his role in helping Elena. Though released on bail, the charges had remained pending, a sword hanging over his head. "That's great news," Elena said, genuinely pleased for the young cook who had shown such loyalty. "Celebrations on me," Raymond declared, emerging from the kitchen with a freshly baked pie. "Tommy's special, apple cinnamon with too much cinnamon." "Hey," Tommy protested, "it's the perfect amount of cinnamon. You just have weak taste buds." The small celebration extended into the evening, the diner's usual closing time coming and going unnoticed. These moments of normalcy had become precious. To Elena, simple human connections without the weight of secrets or danger. Later that week, Elena made the drive to Atlanta to visit Riva at the VA hospital. She found her former commander sitting in a wheelchair by the window, her military posture undiminished despite her injuries. "They're saying I'll need this chair for at least 3 months, Riva said by way of greeting, patting the wheelchair's arm. "And physical therapy for a year after that." "You'll do it in half the time," Elena replied, knowing Riva's determination. "Damn right I will." Riva wheeled herself around to face Elena fully. You were always the spine of Ghost Company. You know, holding us upright when missions went sideways. Elena shook her head. You were its heart. You kept us alive. We kept each other alive, Riva corrected. And now, we're doing it again. They spoke for hours, about the past they'd shared, the years apart, the uncertain future ahead. Riva had been approached about testifying before a closed congressional committee, her existence a shock to officials who had believed Ghost Company completely eliminated. They want to contain it, Riva explained. Limit the exposure to a few bad apples like Barrett. And the weapons deals? Elena asked. The contractors who profited? Some will face consequences, others will be protected. Politics, Riva said, her disgust evident. But at least the truth is known. That's more than we had a month ago. It was time to leave, Elena hesitated in the doorway. I'm writing a book, she admitted, about Ghost Company, about what really happened. Riva's expression was unreadable. They won't like that. I know. They'll try to stop you. Claim national security concerns. I know that too. Riva studied her former lieutenant for a long moment, then nodded once. Make sure you spell my name right. Back in Millridge, the renovation of the shelter was progressing rapidly. What had begun as Raymond's project had become a community effort. Veterans from neighboring towns arrived to help, drawn by word of mouth and a growing sense of purpose. One evening, as Elena supervised the installation of new plumbing, a local tattoo artist named Sarah approached her. I heard about what you're doing here, she said. I'd like to offer free cover-up work for vets with scars they want to transform, and discounts on military tribute pieces. Elena considered the offer. That's generous. It's personal, Sarah admitted. My brother came back from Afghanistan, with burns on 60% of his body. A tattoo artist in Phoenix helped him reclaim how he saw himself. The conversation stayed with Elena. That night, she examined her own scars in the mirror of her apartment, no longer hiding from them, but not yet fully at peace with their presence either. The next day, she visited Sarah's small tattoo studio on the edge of town. 2 hours later, she emerged with a new addition to her skin, a rising phoenix inked beside her Ghost Company emblem, its wings wrapping around a coffee mug in a subtle nod to the diner that had become her unlikely sanctuary. Tommy noticed it immediately when she returned to the old glory. That better be decaf, he joked, pointing to the mug in the design. Caffeine makes phoenixes jittery. Elena allowed herself a rare laugh, the sound surprising both of them. The shelter opened 3 months after Barrett's arrest. They called it Second Watch, a military reference to taking over guard duty, providing relief to those who had stood vigil through the darkest hours. On opening day, 6 veterans moved into the newly renovated spaces. Among them was a young woman with burn scars across her face, recently discharged from the Marines after an IED in Syria. She kept to herself, avoiding eye contact, shoulders hunched against expected judgment. A mirror image of Elena when she'd first arrived in Millridge. That evening, as Elena showed her to her room, the young Marine finally spoke. Did it get easier? She asked quietly. Having people stare at you? Elena considered the question seriously. Not easier, but different. The scars stop being the first thing you think about when you look in the mirror, the young woman nodded, absorbing this. I used to be pretty. You still are, Elena replied, just with a more interesting story written on your skin. Over the following months, Second Watch grew, as did its reputation. Veterans from across the state sought it out, some staying briefly, others becoming part of the extended family that formed around the shelter and diner. When the local Veterans Affairs office asked Elena to speak at a town hall meeting, she initially refused. Public speaking had never been her strength, and her instinct to avoid attention remained strong. Dean convinced her otherwise. They need to hear from someone who's walked through the fire, he argued. Not some bureaucrat. With statistics, reluctantly, Elena agreed. Standing before the gathered veterans and community members, she found herself speaking not about war or betrayal, but about survival. Sometimes the battlefield is just being believed, she told them. Having someone look at your scars, visible or invisible, and see strength instead of damage. Her words resonated beyond the small town hall. Local news covered the speech, then regional outlets. Veterans organizations reached out, asking Elena to share her story at other events. She declined most invitations, preferring to focus on the tangible work of the shelter. But her message spread nonetheless, carried by those who had heard it firsthand. One crisp autumn morning, Elena and Riva, now walking with a cane but free of the wheelchair, drove to the woods where they had hidden months earlier. They carried a small box containing the dog tags of their fallen Ghost Company teammates, collected by Riva over years of quiet investigation. The burial was simple, without ceremony or words. Just two survivors honoring those who had not made it home, in a quiet forest clearing far from the battlefields where they had fallen. As they walked back to the car, Riva paused. "I'm writing a book too," she said. "Called it Ghosts Don't Die." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Catchy title." "I want you to write the foreword," Riva continued. "Tell your part of the story." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "I'll write it. But I already know the last line." "What's that?" "We served in silence so others could speak." Riva smiled, approving. "Damn right we did." Winter settled over Millridge, snow dusting the town in a pristine white that seemed to mute the harshness of the world. The holiday season brought increased business to the diner and a wave of donations to the shelter, evidence of the community's growing acceptance of what Elena and Raymond had built. On a quiet December morning, Elena found an official letter in her mailbox. The congressional seal caught her eye immediately, as did the signature of the Armed Services Committee chairperson. Inside was an invitation. Elena and the other surviving members of Ghost Company were to be posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, their existence finally acknowledged by the country they had served. "Posthumously," Elena said later, showing the letter to Raymond. "They still can't quite admit we're alive." Raymond chuckled. "Bureaucracy moves slower than a wounded turtle. At least they're recognizing what you did." The ceremony was scheduled for February in Washington. Elena approached it with mixed emotions, pride in her unit's recognition, wariness of the political theater involved, concern about public exposure after years in hiding. Riva shared her ambivalence. "They'll try to control the narrative," she warned during one of their weekly phone calls. "Make it about heroism and sacrifice, not about the cover-up." "Let them try," Elena replied. "We know the truth. And now others do too." January brought a new development. A national news program requested an interview with Elena about Ghost Company and the shelter she'd helped establish. After much consideration and consultation with Riva, she agreed, with specific conditions about what questions could be asked. The interview was conducted at the diner, with Raymond and Dean nearby for moral support. The reporter, a veteran herself, approached the story with unexpected sensitivity. "Why did you stay quiet for so long?" she asked as the cameras rolled. Elena met her gaze directly. "Because I was told silence was safer than justice. I was wrong." The segment aired the following week, bringing a flood of attention to Millridge. Veterans arrived seeking help. Donations poured in. Media requests multiplied, most of which Elena declined. But most significantly, other survivors came forward, not from Ghost Company, but from similar units that had been disavowed or written out of official records. Men and women who had served in shadows, their sacrifices unacknowledged, found in Elena's story the courage to tell their own. The military establishment responded with predictable damage control, acknowledging some claims, disputing others, emphasizing the necessity of classified operations while promising greater accountability. Through it all, Elena maintained her focus on the shelter and its residents. The public attention would fade, she knew, but the need would remain. In February, a local museum approached her about creating a small exhibit honoring Ghost Company. Initially reluctant, Elena eventually agreed after consulting with Riva and the families of their fallen teammates. "It should be their story, not just ours," she insisted, "the ones who didn't come back." The exhibit opened in March, a simple but powerful collection of photographs, letters, and personal effects. Elena curated it herself, ensuring accuracy and dignity in how her unit was portrayed. Barrett's trial proceeded through military courts, largely hidden from public view. Elena testified once, facing her former adversary across a sterile courtroom. His power diminished, his uniform stripped of insignia. Barrett seemed smaller somehow, just a man whose ambition had cost lives. His conviction brought not triumph, but a quiet sense of completion. Some debts could never be fully repaid. Some wounds never fully healed, but the scales of justice had finally acknowledged the weight of his crimes. Spring brought new growth to Milridge and to the shelter. What had begun as temporary housing evolved into a comprehensive support system: job training, counseling, peer mentorship, all designed to help veterans transition back into civilian life. One sunny afternoon, Elena was handling the lunch rush at the diner when a young girl entered with her mother. The child, perhaps 10 years old, had a prominent burn mark covering one side of her face. She stared at Elena with frank curiosity. "I like your tattoo," the girl said when Elena brought their order. "Mine's ugly, though." She gestured to her scarred cheek. Elena set down her tray and knelt to the girl's eye level. "Can I tell you something about scars?" The girl nodded. "Scars just mean you lived through fire," Elena said gently. "They're proof you're stronger than whatever tried to hurt you." The girl considered this, then smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "Like a superhero origin story?" "Exactly like that," Elena agreed. That evening, the diner hosted its first Veterans Voice Night, an open mic event where former service members could share stories, poetry, or music. The idea had come from Dean, who recognized the healing power of giving voice to experiences often kept silent. The turnout exceeded expectations. Veterans from Milridge and surrounding communities filled the booths and counter seats. Some shared combat experiences, others spoke of the challenges of coming home. Tears were shed, laughter erupted, and in the spaces between words, a community strengthened its bonds. Joanne surprised everyone by speaking about her son Brian. Not to defend his actions, but to acknowledge the complex reality of a family torn between love and accountability. "He made choices I can't excuse," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "But he's still my son, and I'm learning that supporting him doesn't mean denying what he did wrong." Her raw honesty earned respectful nods from many veterans present, who understood too well the ripple effects of trauma through families and communities. Summer arrived with an unexpected letter. A group of female cadets from the nearby military academy requested to meet Elena. Intrigued, she agreed to a visit at the diner. 6 young women arrived in civilian clothes, but with unmistakable military bearing. Their leader, a serious-faced cadet named Williams, explained their interest. "They added Ghost Company to the tactical operations curriculum," she said, "but the official version still downplays your role as a female commanding officer." She glanced at Riva, who had joined them for the meeting. "We wanted to hear the real story." For the next 2 hours, Elena and Riva shared their experiences, the challenges they'd faced not just in combat, but in a system still adjusting to women in leadership roles. The cadets listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about tactical decisions, leadership philosophy, and resilience. As they prepared to leave, William stood at attention. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Riva smiled slightly. "Granted. You changed things for us," William said simply. "Made the path a little wider." The cadets offered a crisp salute, not required in civilian clothes, but given freely as a gesture of respect. Elena and Riva returned it automatically, muscle memory from years of service. That evening, as the sun set over Milridge, Elena stepped outside the diner for a moment of quiet reflection. A year had passed since her arrival, a year of revelation, confrontation, and finally, rebuilding. The town had changed. She had changed. The scars remained, both physical and emotional, but they no longer defined her story. As she watched, the group of cadets walked past on the opposite sidewalk. Seeing Elena, they paused, then offered another salute before continuing on their way. Elena returned the gesture, a small smile crossing her face. The simple respect in their eyes contained no pity, no morbid curiosity about her scars, no judgment of her past, only recognition of a soldier who had walked the difficult path before them. She thought of the frightened waitress who had arrived in this town a year ago, hiding her scars and her truth. That woman had been a ghost, caught between worlds, belonging nowhere. The ghost was gone now. In her place stood a warrior, scarred, but whole. Her tattoo symbols not of pain but of survival. Her legacy not what had been taken from her, but what she had built from the ruins. Elena Carter stepped back into the warmth of the diner, leaving the door open behind her to welcome whoever might come next. What price would you pay for the truth when even your own country wants you silenced? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, and if this story of courage and redemption touched you, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more powerful tales of heroes who fight their battles both on and off the battlefield.